like to welcome everybody tonight to our program. And so now to introduce Benedetta. Benedetta is an Italian food writer and photographer, and she was born in Milan, but now she lives in Santa Monica, California. In 2009, she co-founded a website called Labna, the only Jewish kosher cooking blog in Italy that specialized in Italian and Jewish cuisine. And since then, she has been spreading the word about the marvels of Italian Jewish food in Italy and abroad, teaching the recipes of the cuisine to a growing number of people in cooking schools, synagogues, and community centers. Her work has been featured in numerous news outlets in Italy and abroad, including the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, Saor, and Tablet. She has co-authored 2 cookbooks in Italian, and this cookbook over here is her newest cookbook, and it is also the winner of the 2022 Jewish Book Council Award. I'm going to hand it over to Benedetta, and welcome, Tikvah.
Thank you, Kyle, for the lovely introduction. And hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight and for joining me, despite the fact that, we're remote in my kitchen. So when I usually teach this type of cooking class, I like to first provide an introduction and then cook. However, tonight we're doing 2 recipes that are sort of time consuming because we wanted to pick something for Shavuot since that's the upcoming Jewish holiday. So I will reverse my usual order and we will start from the cooking and then I will lecture. So just bear with me, we will get to both. And if let's just start doing that, although I see there are still people coming. And then, like I said, then we get to the history and the culture of Jewish Italian food, which some of you might be also interested in. So let me switch screens.
Hi, now I can hear you.
I did switch the main screen on purpose because I wanted us to have a view over the kitchen, but the mute wasn't planned, so thank you for checking on me. So I was just saying, we will be cooking now, first the dessert and then the main. The dessert is called montini. Montini are a type of pastry made with almond flour that are generally prepared for Shavuot, though we also prepare them for Purim sometimes. And since they're made with almond flour, I also like to prepare them for Passover because they're naturally gluten-free. But traditionally, they're made for Shavuot. So we will first start with montini, and then we'll get to the main, which is a pasta dish. So I will just flip back here to my setup in the kitchen so you can see what I'm doing. I've got 1 egg, which I will beat into my bowl. We don't need to do any real beating. We don't need whisks or anything. I'm just giving it a quick stir with a fork. Then I'll add sugar. You will have all of the recipes in writing, so you don't need to worry about amounts right now. You'll get them later. And then I will be adding almond flour. Now I've got a bigger pile of almond flour on the side, but I will keep some on the side because I want to be able to make montini of 2 colors. Some will be white with just plain almond and some will be brown with cocoa. So I give it a stir with a spoon, but I will soon begin with my hands, which is the way we do it. So this is the simplest of things. We just want this dough to slowly come together. Now, I have on the side some liquid, which can be traditionally liquor. I don't like liquor, so I'll be using a tiny bit of milk. Either works. So you can pick whichever one you prefer. But you see, even without the liquid, it's already starting to come together. I've got more flour. And like I said, my shot of milk. What we want to achieve eventually is something of the texture of almond paste. For those of you who are familiar with almond paste, this is actually traditionally an almond paste that you could even eat raw if your eggs are very fresh. But just for the sake of not giving you guys food poisoning, we bake it really shortly. This will stay in the oven for about 7 to 10 minutes. So I've got my basic dough, the white one. I'm gonna set some aside. And then I'm gonna add cocoa powder to the second half to turn it brown. You can also use in this recipe food coloring if that's something that you're comfortable with. Traditionally, these cookies were made white and brown and pink. For, like I said, for those who don't mind the food coloring. So what we will be doing in a moment when I'm done with my dough is we will shape it into balls. And for that, I would recommend you guys use, well, you can happily use your hands, but if you want even-sized balls, the best thing to do would probably be to use a cookie scoop. And then we will roll those balls into something that resembles a mountain. Because montini in Italian means small mountains. And the reason why we prepare them is that they're supposed to remind us of Mount Sinai. So I've got my baking paper ready on a tray. So I can make, like I said, montinis just white. And the way I would do is I would take a scoop from the cookie scoop, and then I would try to shape it into this sort of traditional shape, which is pointy on the top, not really pointy like, not like a triangle type of pointy, but pointier. So to remind us of the shape of a mountain. And the way we do the chocolate ones, you can do just the full shape, but otherwise the traditional way of presenting them is to have half a bowl of the white, half a bowl of the brown dough, and then cut them in half. Let me grab a knife. We're gonna cut them in half. One brown, one white. Match them together and then shape them into a bicolor mountain. So that's the other option, to have double colored montini. So you just put your halves together and then you proceed to making them pointy on the top. Like I said, these are perfectly, if your eggs are fresh, these are perfectly safe to eat even without baking, but they're traditionally baked. Now we will bake them really briefly for 7 minutes. And the way we will know that they're ready is just to make sure that they are sort of getting colored on the bottom, but we do want them to stay pale on the top. So if we do let them brown too much, then they will not be as soft as I would like them to be. So we want to just keep an eye on the oven time. You got the idea, so I'm not gonna go ahead now and make the whole dough. I'll save that effort for after class, but I am gonna put these ones in the oven. So in 7 to 10 minutes, you know what they should be looking like.
And just to let the audience know that at the end, we'll take some questions from the chat. And Nadia is with us tonight, our Youth and Young Family Coordinator, and her family is from Italy. So she has agreed to moderate our questions at the end.
Yeah, which is lovely. So these ones are basic, very easy, as you can tell, dessert. Anyone can do it. It's super kid friendly, so just go ahead and have fun with it. Oh, you can also decorate montini with dried fruit. If that's something you like, you can throw in some dried fruit. Yeah, that's about it. We will check them out in a tiny bit. Now I'm taking out my KitchenAid, which hopefully you can more or less see. What I'll be doing now, I have my pasta attachment on, which you may or may not have. If you enjoy cooking and you might enjoy making pasta, you should get one. It's great. Or get a pasta machine. Either way, I've got my flour. I'm gonna make just one egg. In Italy, we usually do one egg per person, so I'll be doing one portion tonight. So I'll be doing one egg, and again, in Italy, the usual amount is one egg and 100 grams of flour per person. So I'm just adding one egg to my dough, to my KitchenAid. Then I'll be adding flour. This is just regular all-purpose flour. Now, a lot of people when I teach cooking classes ask me if Italians always eat fresh pasta. We don't. I barely ever make fresh pasta. It's a great sign of kavod if I'm gonna bother to make fresh pasta for my guests. So I'll just, it might be too little to work with the KitchenAid, in which case I'll do it by hand. Yeah, and it's also too loud, so bear with me. We're just gonna go with our hands. So I'm mixing my pasta with my egg. I can throw in a pinch of salt, but all you really need is just egg and flour. So again, we mix them with our hands until the dough comes together. And then I'm gonna use my KitchenAid to stretch it into a flat sheet. If you have a regular rolling pin, that will work too. It's just a bit harder. So for the sake of time, we will not. You just want your egg and flour to start coming together like that. The beauty of a rolling pasta machine is that even though your dough might not be perfectly fine, by the time you're done rolling it, it's a thing of beauty. So you can see that my dough is far from perfect. It's sort of lumpy, but once it goes through the rolling machine, it will be perfectly fine. We might need a bit of extra flour. We'll see as we go along. You can see that, I hope you can more or less see that it's coming out very lumpy, but flat. Now I fold it in half and I let it go again. This is just regular fresh egg pasta. It's the same fresh egg pasta that you would make if you wanted to make tagliatelle, tagliolini, lasagna, any other type of pasta. I'm adding a bit of flour. I'm folding it in. And I'm going another roll. Like I said, rolling pin would work equally fine. We're just a bit lazy. I'm taking a tiny bit of extra flour, so it's still a bit wet. I fold it in half again. We keep folding it until it eventually has a nice and even rectangular shape. Or as rectangular as it's willing to become. And then we roll it really thin. Now, how thin is a matter of personal preference. I like my pasta on the rougher side so that it has a bit of a bite. I mean, the real traditional way of doing it would have you, roll it as thin as you can possibly roll it. You should be able to almost see through it. So this is still really thick, as you can see. So I'm now going to make my rolling machine roll it thinner. And what we will do with this dough is we will fill it and then we will bake it. So you can see it's getting thinner, but it's still not thin as much as I would like it. There we go. This is appropriately thin. It could be thinner, so this is like the 3, this is setting 3, it goes down to 1. So I could make it thinner, but this is a good thickness. I like it that way. So I'm gonna switch off my pasta rolling machine, which I can, I guess, push back so you can see me. Very good. I'll clean my hands a bit, and I'll prepare the filling. Now, you will be surprised that in the filling that we prepare today, there's 2 unusual ingredients. There's cinnamon and there's sugar. Now, I know it sounds weird to have sugar and cinnamon in a main dish. However, when you think about it, there's many times, for example, when you make a cheese board, where we pair things that are sweet with cheese. It's not the most unusual thing when you think about it. And you'll be surprised how yummy it is. So I'm getting myself a cutter. And I'm gonna start cutting out the uneven corner of my pasta, which I can always re-roll later because it's very forgiving. And I'm also gonna make it slightly straighter on the corners. Very good. Now I got myself a tiny portion of pasta for today because I'm too fat to afford any more food. So I got to limit my pasta intake. So we're only gonna make a tiny one. And what we're gonna do is the following. Now you have 3 options. When I'll send you the recipe, you'll see it in writing. This dish can be filled with 3 things. Simplest of them all, just butter. Second option, ricotta cheese. Third option, bechamel sauce. Now, we don't have time today to make the bechamel sauce, but that would be my preferred option. So in the recipe, you have bechamel sauce. However, if you're on the run and you still want to get it done and it's going to still be really nice for your Shavuot dinner, I get some ricotta cheese, which I am going to mix with sugar, like I said. So just regular white sugar, cinnamon, which is really what makes this dish somewhat unique, and then a ton of Parmesan cheese. Can you get any other similar cheese to Parmesan cheese? Absolutely, no one is going to judge you. This is proper Italian Parmigiano, but you're most welcome to use pecorino or whatever other sort of hard grated cheese that is easily accessible to you. The trick here is that it's the Parmesan or whatever other similar cheese you get being really salty and well seasoned that balances out the sugar and the cinnamon. So even if you were to do it with bechamel or with nothing at all, you really want to use a lot of Parmesan cheese. Very good. So I'm going to cut this into little portions, which I'm going to fill with my filling. Very good, that's it. And I'm gonna roll them up just so that they stay closed. It's not, they don't need to be perfect, but we just want them to turn into tiny rolls, which I'm gonna lay down in my tray. However, I want to brush my tray with butter first. So I've got here some butter, which I melted earlier, and I'm just brushing the bottom. So there we go, bottom brushed. I can put my rolls in my tray. So here's another one. go. You have a full portion whenever you're going to receive the recipe via email, but this for us tonight is plenty. Obviously, the seal part of the roll goes at the bottom of the tray so that it doesn't open up when it's cooking. And here's my last roll. There we go. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna press them a tiny bit so that the filling spreads out also on the side. There we go. And last but not least, I am gonna brush them with some more butter on top. Now this butter got solid real quick. But there we go. Butter. And some more Parmesan cheese. It's lumpier than I would have liked. There we go. And one last bit of cinnamon, just to finish it up. Like I said, trust me, this will work. It seems strange, there's sugar, there's cinnamon, but I promise you it's yummy.
Yeah, it seems like it's like a blend.
Right? But it's savory eventually.
But, yeah, and almost like manicotti, but you didn't have tomato sauce.
So it's funny that you mentioned. People ask me about manicotti a lot. Manicotti are not really a thing in Italy. I don't recall anytime I was in Italy, ever seeing a pasta shape called manicotti. We got cannelloni, which are similar. We got many other things, but what Americans call manicotti, not a thing in my experience. But before it gets too late, let me check on our cookies. So I'm burning my hands, so bear with me. But these are our cookies underneath, and these are our cookies on the outside. Now I'm officially burning myself. I guess I should have taken the whole tray. So you can see they got somewhat burnt, I don't want to say burnt, but like colored on top where the pointy part is, and on the bottom. But the sides, if I squish them, are still soft. That's how cooked we want them to be. So you see the top is a tiny bit more cooked, the bottom is cooked, and the sides remain soft. That's how we make them soft and pleasant to eat. Otherwise, they turn real hard real quick. Very good. So I've got my pasta in the oven. And I've got my mountains, my montini out of the oven. So we call that mission accomplished. I switch to my other screen. Can you all hear me? Yes, hopefully. Very good.
Yes, yes, yes.
So having accomplished our basic recipes for today, I'm washing my hands so that I don't make my whole computer dirty. And then I'm gonna start telling you about the history of Jewish Italian food, which is pretty much my obsession. So, there we go. I am gonna share my slides, which you will hopefully be able to see in a second. Giudia. Slides. Okay. So Zoom, share screen. There we go. So you have already kindly introduced me, so we don't need to talk about myself, but we can talk about the Jews of Italy. So when I first moved to the US, and you know, I get to talk to people and people note my accent, because the Italian accent is really thick. People are very surprised that I introduce myself as an Italian Jew. People always ask me, oh, are there Jews in Italy? Really? Is that a thing? Yes, it is. Definitely there are Jews in Italy. Not very many, but there are some. We have a tiny community. And then the other thing that typically they ask me is, do we eat only fried artichokes? Because for some reason the fried artichokes are the only dish that seems to have crossed the borders and be known to a wider audience. But while they are delicious, there's a lot more to our cuisine than that. I had to fight with my publisher, and I lost my fight because they ended up on the cover of the book. I didn't want them there because I was sure that there's other dishes that we can, use to represent the cuisine, but that's definitely the most representative one. So what else is there to our cuisine than that, and who are the Jews of Italy? So the Jews have lived in Italy actually for a really long time. We believe we are the oldest diaspora out of Israel in the world. How? The Jews have settled straight from the motherland to Italy during the Jewish-Roman wars, starting in the 66 CE. So we're talking millennia ago. And the Jewish presence has been constant in Italy ever since then. Now, what is fascinating about our community, and I'll get to that later, is that these were Jews that came straight from Israel. So we're not Sephardi nor Ashkenazi. We call ourselves Italkim, like Italians, in that we have our own very special set of stories, traditions, and for example, Nusach, so way of praying and everything else. Now, while I'm a history geek, I will try not to have you walk through all of these dates. However, there's a few of these dates that I want you to keep in mind, so when we talk about the food, things will start to make sense. Essential ones are probably a couple. The Alhambra decree, which you might be familiar as when the Jews were expelled from Spain, which is 1492. That is relevant to Italian cuisine because the Jews of Italy, but in particular the Jews of Sicily, were affected by it. Sicily, which is the bottom of Italy, used to belong to the Spanish kingdom at that time. So when the Jews were expelled from Spain, that set of decisions influenced the way the Jews of Italy too had to live the place where they settled. A lot of them were in Sicily. Another couple of dates that I ask you to keep in mind because they're relevant for us from a culinary perspective are the creations of the ghettos in Venice and Rome, 1516 and 1555. Ghettos, which by the way are an infamous Italian invention. It's Italians who came up with the idea of a ghetto to lock their Jews away from the rest of the population. Ghettos have a silver lining from a culinary perspective. We all agree that ghettos are a really bad thing and it's unfair to keep people separate. But from a cultural and culinary perspective, the existence of the ghetto really changed and drove the evolution of our cuisine because people were locked in there. So the way they cooked had limitations that were different from that of the people who were living free outside. And also had a silver lining because the fact that things were preserved inside the ghetto allowed a number of traditions and recipes as well to live a longer and healthier life, preventing those traditions and recipes from being lost in the outer world. And that's it for dates. I might get back to the other dates, but these are plenty for today. Now let's talk briefly about the Jews of Italy, though I already told you some of these things, and then we can dig into the food. So I told you that we've been around since the Republican age of Rome, and that we're not Sephardi nor Ashkenazi, we're Italian. That means that when I moved to the US and I found myself my American boyfriend and his daughter, they were quite surprised that in my household we don't do matzah balls, we don't do gefilte fish, we don't do any of those things that you guys would usually think of as Jewish food. I have no opinions on who makes the better bagels, whether it's New York or Montreal. None. I'm not entitled to it because that is not my Jewish food. My Jewish food is very, very different from what you guys would think of as Jewish food. So without further ado, what do I call Jewish Italian food? So when I started writing this book, my publisher and my editor, who's a saint of a woman, were like, we have to narrow it down. I had over 400 recipes. And they were like, what is Jewish Italian food? What are the representative dishes? What's the criteria? And the criteria has been harder for me to narrow than I would have expected, because eventually Jewish Italian food for me is a label that covers probably three things. One is the food that the Jews of Italy invented. So the authentic recipes that only the Jews, or at least only the Jews at the beginning, used to cook. Then there's another aspect to it, which is the recipes that the Jews have made kosher to adapt them to their dietary needs. So these might be Italian recipes, but have a very specific Jewish and kosher spin. So that was definitely a second element to it. And a third element to it was, what are those recipes that are at the crossroads of Jewish Italian food that sort of highlight for us how Jews changed the way Italians eat and how Italians changed the way the Jews eat. So let me just walk you through some examples so it becomes clearer. Here on my slide on the right, you see a dish called orecchiette. Orecchiette are a type of pasta. If you ask Italians, and I know we have some in the audience, they would tell you that this is a dish from the region of Apulia. Apulia is in southern Italy. They eat really well out there. And they're very, very proud of this specific dish. Now, orecchiette, this pasta shape, orecchiette means small ears. Now, it doesn't take a genius of a detective to figure out that there is virtually one religion in which we eat the ears of our enemies. That's the Osne Aman, which we eat for Purim. Why else would we call a dish orecchiette? Now, they do look like tiny ears, but if you start looking into the history of this dish and where this dish came from, it turns out it wasn't invented in Apulia like people of Apulia like to think. It was a French dish from the region of Provence in southern France, which the Jews used to prepare to celebrate the holiday of Purim. Now, those Jews crossed the border into Italy because they were merchants and travelers. So the dish eventually arrived across the Mediterranean to Italy. But it wasn't born as an Italian dish, it was born as a Jewish dish. So when I started researching all of these stories, it turns out that there's very many. And so I started to really feel that we want to set the record straight, because there aren't many Jews in Italy. There's about 35,000 of us. We don't have much of cultural representation. I want to say we're pretty quiet and fairly invisible. So a lot of our contribution to what people think of as Italian culture, and in particular my subject being food, a lot of the Jewish contribution has sort of been forgotten, has sort of fallen into the oblivion. However, it's actually quite relevant when you start digging. And here are some more of those stories. Eggplants. We think of eggplant as a very, very Italian ingredient. We've got eggplants in pasta alla norma, we've got eggplants in eggplant parmigiana. It's hard to imagine Italian food without eggplants because we consume them a lot. However, it hasn't always been the case. Italians were very skeptical of eggplants. They thought that eggplants could be potentially poisonous. They didn't want to cook with them. And it was really pretty much the Jews who were familiar with eggplants because they learned to cook with them in the Mediterranean from the Arabs and from the North African countries. That really brought eggplants to Italians and sort of introduced the ingredient to the country. In addition, for centuries, like I said, Italians were very skeptical of it, and you can still find it in recipe books. One of the most famous recipe cookbooks of Italy, called by by an author called Pellegrino Artusi. Artusi, who is like, I want to say like the Giulia child of Italy, to give you a sense of proportion. Artusi has eggplants described in his book, and we're talking the 18th century, as potentially poisonous, best left to Jews and dogs, literally. So it's hard to imagine how Italians would have managed without the Jews if the Jews didn't bring them eggplants. Now, like I told you, these are dishes at the crossroad. However, there's the other side of the flip side of the coin, which is how Italians have influenced the way the Jews of Italy ended up cooking their food. And these are not always happy stories, but stories with a happy end. So I asked you to remember the existence of the ghetto as a relevant topic for us tonight. And the reason is that there is a number of dishes that were born out of the ghetto experience that would probably not have existed if Italians had not been locked in ghettos. That is the story, for example, of the two dishes that you see on the right side of my slide, the Roman fish soup and the artichokes con l'indivia. So let me tell you more about those. In Rome, the Jews were locked in a ghetto, like we said. That ghetto was in a really undesirable part of the city. The poverty was striking, the conditions were dire, hygiene was complicated, people were living one on top of each other. The ghetto was also near the Tiber River, so it was a very humid and like unpleasant place to live. In addition, it was also right there where the fish market was. Now, the Jews were living in the ghetto, they were very, very poor. They were restricted in the options of the jobs that they could take and the professions, so they were really quite in bad shape. So what would the women of the ghetto do? They would go to the market at the end of the market day and collect whichever scraps were available that were kosher, heads and tails and whatever they could find. How to cook them after, 12 hours in the sun? They had to boil them. That was the most sanitary thing to do. And you grab a bit of tomato and a bit of herbs and whatever you have around, and here comes the soup. Now, this soup is obviously not exactly the same thing you would eat today. Now, when you go to Rome, the Roman fish soup is considered a delicacy. It's like a very fancy product. However, that is actually the origin of the dish. It was born out of poverty and out of the restrictions that Italian imposed on Jews. So there is a happy end because the dish is now, it's just a delicious, happy dish. However, that's not how it was born. A similar story is the story of artichokes con l'indivia, the dish that you see underneath. Artichokes con l'indivia, again, if you visit Rome, their local specialty. It's a Jewish dish, but everybody eats it on a regular basis. Artichokes are like chunky anchovies of sorts. And indivia is just curly endive. It's like it's a very inexpensive salad. Now, at some point, the Pope had decided the Jews were not allowed to buy big fishes. So let's assume you were a Jew that had saved some money and you wanted to eat a proper fish, say you wanted a branzino. The Pope decided that no, because Jews were not allowed any luxury. Now, we all know that fish is not exactly a luxury, but the Pope decided that the Jews would only be allowed to eat small, inexpensive, undesirable fishes. So sardines, anchovies, the tiny fishes, the one that didn't really have a great appeal. He also decided that you could have salads, but hear me out, without eggs and without meat. Which again, why? Because the Pope was mean. So what did the Jews do? So they had the salads and they had the tiny undesirable fishes. They tried to make the most of what they had. So they came up with this baking solution where and even the anchovies are layered into some sort of a pie with garlic and with, spices, whatever they had at hand. And they chuck them in the oven. Turns out it's a delicious dish. How lucky is that? So again, would the Jews of Italy have wanted to cook this stuff? Probably not. Did the circumstances leave them no choice? That's what happened. However, they made the most of those circumstances. And so they came up with these dishes that to this day we still cherish and appreciate, which is sort of like the happy end to that story. And now the third aspect to, like I said, what I was trying to explain was how keeping kosher affected our cooking, and therefore how keeping kosher changed the way the Jews of Italy eat compared to the rest of the population. I usually have here a slide about what kosher means, but I've been assured that hopefully we all online tonight know the basic rules, so I'll skip those. But I want to say the most relevant rule that has really shaped the way we eat has been avoiding to mix meat and milk, because that's pretty big deal, and it's a pretty big deal if you're Italian, because we tend to do it a lot in Italy. It's just a thing we like. So forget the cheeseburgers, but lasagna. Lasagna has bechamel sauce in it, and bechamel is made with butter and milk. And then there's bolognese sauce, which is, beef. So as a Jew, and I can tell you that from personal experience, you want to eat what everyone else in your country is eating. You don't want to be left out. As a kid, you want to have lasagna just like everybody else does. So how have the Jews of Italy worked around the prohibition of mixing meat and milk? Well, in three ways. Milk is often substituted with broth, and butter is 100% of the time substituted with oil. We barely use any butter ever. So for example, lasagna, you can make a perfectly good bechamel with oil instead of butter and broth instead of milk. Is it identical to the other? No. Is it absolutely delicious and still very worth your time? Yes. So at that point, for example, you can put together your lasagna. Pork is not an option. However, pork is so important in the Italian diet. We use pork for a number of things. So what did the Jews of Italy do? Now, this is more a thing of the past than a thing of the present. These days, it's not as common anymore. But for centuries, the Jews of Italy cooked with goose instead of pork. Geese were easy to farm, I guess is the verb. Geese were easy to farm. You could keep them, in your courtyard. They were very easy animals. And so the Jews took to raising geese and butcher them like they would for pork, and then treat them and cook them exactly like pork would be prepared. So that's how, for example, in the book I've got for you a recipe for goose prosciutto. Is it prosciutto for real? No, because it's not made of pork. But does it have the same spices? Is it cured the same way? Does it end up tasting somewhat similar? Yes. So we used to make prosciutto, we used to make salami, and all sorts of other charcuterie products with goose instead of pork. Goose is also a very versatile ingredient, because at that point, once they butchered the whole goose, they would use it to also make soups more flavorful, or they would make the same thing that Ashkenazis call gribenes, like the fat, the tiny fatty pieces. We would make gribole, which is pretty much obviously a copy of the Ashkenazi thing. So with the goose, we sort of overcame the issue of not being able to eat pork. Pastries. Italians use a lot of butter and they make a lot of pastries. Pasta frolla, the traditional cookie and pie dough, is made with butter, but we couldn't, because what if in the same meal you were gonna eat beef? So we ended up making all of those recipes exactly identical with oil instead of butter. So in a Jewish household, you rarely find any butter, because oil can just be used pretty much in the same way. Now, I say, because people usually ask me which oil. So in Italy, we cook a lot with extra virgin olive oil because it's readily available and it's not as expensive as it is in the US. So for all of my savory dishes, you would always have extra virgin olive oil. However, for baking, extra virgin olive oil tends to be too flavorful. So most of the time you would see peanut or sunflower oil being used instead of butter, because olive oil would be too flavorful. Now you can find really light olive oil, but still it tastes like olive oil. So other types of oil might be better suited for baking, which, like I said, solves the problem of butter practically all of the time. So these were the three ways we tried to overcome the issue of keeping kosher. We are getting a bit tight with time, and this was for now my last slide. However, let me check on our pasta in the oven and I'll be right back. There we go, perfect timing. So let me see how without switching screens, if I can show you the pasta. This is our pasta, not the finest video skills ever, but you get the idea. It has like a nice crust on top, and the pasta is baked, and there is inside the filling that we previously prepared.
Oh, Benedetta, if you stop sharing your screen, we'll be able to see you better.
Oh, oopsie, I'm very, very sorry. There we go. I hope that sort of works. So the top is sort of crustier, and the filling has hopefully cooked together with the pasta. And that will be my stepdaughter's dinner, because she can afford the calories. Very good. So we still have like 10 minutes, a bit more, 12 minutes for questions. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I got backup slides with more stuff.
No, it was very interesting. I'm going to bring in Nadia here.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Benedetta, sei bravissima.
She speaks Italian, but we're not going to do that to you.
No, we're not. But I had to start. You make it look so easy.
It is. So, yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Italian food is not that hard. I mean, French is harder. There's cuisines that are much harder than ours. Ours in general is very wholesome and very simple.
Yeah, it's very pure. It's so true. And just whole foods and natural ingredients. I grew up eating everything you showed. Orecchiette with rapini and chili is delicious. Thank you so much.
Did you know they were Jewish?
No, I did not. I learned something
with
that. I had one question before they start coming in. Hopefully people will start. If you want to ask a question, please write it in the chat and I will ask Benedetta. I had one question. With the cookies, you said liqueur was an option. What liqueur would you use?
Good question. So I like them, if I do liquor, which is not my favorite because I just don't like alcohol, I would make them with Cointreau because it tastes like orange, which is very nice. But when I did this, when I did the baking gathering at my synagogue, actually a few weeks ago, they threw in there whatever liquor they had. I think there was whiskey, there was rum, there was literally, they cleaned the pantry pretty much, and they still turned out nice. So I would say whatever liquor you like. That being said, I like Cointreau.
Okay, thank you.
And since we're still talking about those cookies, I forgot to sort of show you. So you see now I can manage them. And you see the inside, you don't really see, but you would know if you could see that better, that the inside is still soft, like I can sneak my finger inside it, and the outside is harder. So you want them to really stay soft on the inside.
They kind of remind me of an almond macaron.
No, they're by all means very similar also to Italian amaretti. Not the crunchy one, the soft type.
All right. Okay, we have a question. Fantastic. From Amber David, asking if there's anything special or different for challah in Italy.
Good question. I'm obsessed with challah. It's my favorite topic. So whoever asked that question, thank you for the opportunity. So there is a recipe for challah in the book, which is the one I like to make. Took me years to come up with it, so hopefully you will enjoy it. Italians don't historically make challah. We tend to celebrate Shabbat with random bread. Any bread, like bread from the bakery or bread that you make yourself, but just regular, crunchy, picture ciabatta type of bread. Now, in the book, there's a recipe called ossi. Ossi are a Roman type of bread. In Rome, I want to say most of the Jewish population would bless those for Shabbat. Now, challah is now more fashionable. Everybody loves challah because it's delicious. It's hard not to love it. So it's definitely taken a turn in favor for challah in the last few years, but generations ago challah was really not a thing. So we would just be blessing any bread, and picture bread that is sort of crunchy, sort of like a ciabatta of sorts. Still, I got a challah in the book. It's amazing. Try that.
All right, thank you. If you have any questions, please add it to the chat. We'll take a few more if you have them.
You can also ask to unmute if you prefer to speak. There's a button on your screens somewhere, I guess.
Okay, I have a question actually. You said Cointreau, which
Yeah.
I get. Would you use like a Galliano?
I wish I knew what that tastes. Is that an Amaro?
No, it's like an Italian liqueur.
No, I figured, but I'm wondering what it tastes like because I've never had it.
My mother bakes with Galliano. She puts the Galliano in her.
It says herbs and spices, anise, licorice, and vanilla. Why not? Now I almost want to go ahead and try it. I'm gonna have to get myself a bottle.
Good. It's hard to find, but it's delicious.
Oh, good to know.
Okay, we have questions. I'm so excited.
Okay.
All right. Are mandel bread really biscotti?
Good question. I wish I had something about that in the book now in retrospect. So the question that I usually get asked is harder than that. The question is which one came first? And for the question which one came first, I have no answer. However, definitely they're pretty identical. Like any recipe for mandel bread that you do, other than the ones that have almond, because mandel bread sometimes has almond, if they just have flour, it's pretty much the same. And it's funny because it's such an international recipe. I'm currently working on a new book on the cuisine of Libya, which is where half of my family comes from. And you need to picture, Libya is in North Africa. It's all across the Mediterranean. And even there, they have a mandel bread recipe. They call them sba. And they're exactly the same. And I'm like, is it now cantucci? Is it biscotti? Is it mandel bread? Is it sba? It appears to be like a really very common preparation. Now we know that the notion itself of biscotti, which means cooked twice, probably dates back to the Roman times. So that is definitely obviously a thing that goes back a very long time, and we can imagine it definitely having roots in Italy. But do I have any really solid historical evidence to, throw on the table? I don't. So, take it with a pinch of salt, assume that the recipe is really pretty similar, and which one came first? We think it's the biscotti, but I don't promise.
You're on mute, Nadia.
Okay. I took a picture of the questions because I can't see everybody at the same time. Okay, we have 3 more questions.
Oh,
Go
wow.
for it. So this is from Rosalind Steiner. I was interested in the fish soup. Gefilte fish is also made from bits and pieces of fish, but prepared into balls. Is this coincidental?
Look, poverty tends to look the same everywhere. We also have some recipes where the fish is turned into balls. But that fish soup, the Roman fish soup, has always been made with whole pieces of fish. Now, they might not be the best, and oftentimes it was especially like the heads to give the soup some flavor, rather than the meat itself of the fish, like the meatier parts. But for meatballs, for fish balls, I guess, for fish balls, we would often have fish balls, but they wouldn't be in a soup. They would be more like fish balls in tomato sauce, but not soupy, not the soupy type. This being said, again, poverty does tend to look the same everywhere, and soup are just like, such a comforting type of food that I guess it's the simplest way to approach cooking sometimes.
Okay, thank you. And we have, we kind of commented a bit about the Libyan food, but Ben Namani says, can you comment on some of the Italian influence in Libyan food, if you are at all familiar with it?
Absolutely. I mean, I love the opportunity. So it's very, very interesting. And there's a few recipes in the book that I tried to where I try to give justice to the Jewish Italian and Jewish Libyan sort of connections, but there will be more in my next book. So there's a couple of recipes that have a really interesting story. When my grandmother, that like I said, came from Libya, the Libyan Jews had to flee their country. So they came to Italy. They were, most of them, very poor and struggling. Anyway, when my grandmother came from Libya, she brought with her a recipe that, contrary to all the other recipes, didn't have an Arabic name. Now, most of our recipes would have had, you know, an Arabic sounding name, but there was this one which they called the bocca di dama. Bocca di dama means in Italian the mouth of a lady. I was like, how weird. All of these other recipes have an Arabic name. This one sounds Italian. Now, they spoke Italian in Libya because Libya used to be a colony of Italy. So it wasn't that weird, but it was weird that it had such a distinctive Italian name. So years later, when I started writing this book, very many years later, I find that this bocca di dama thing actually existed in Leghorn, in Livorno, which is a city in Tuscany. And so things start to add up. I'm like, oh, so they have it in Livorno and they had it in Libya. Now, you need to consider that Leghorn was a major port town that had consistent commercial trades with all of the Mediterranean. And it was a city where the Jews were particularly welcome because the local regulators were very smart and they figured that if they brought the Jews, the Jews would bring wealth. So there were very many Jews in Leghorn. So it was, and this recipe in Leghorn with that name existed way earlier than in Libya they probably even knew how to cook. It existed since the 18th century. So turns out that this cake made it across the Mediterranean all the way to Libya. The people there loved it and they consider it a local dish, like they're sure it's a local thing again, because people, when they adopt a dish, they can become very possessive of it. And they consider it like the probably national dessert. I don't think there's any other sweet of the Libyan tradition that people in Libya are as proud of. And then the thing came full circle, because after the Libyan Jews came to Italy, that recipe came again with them. So the recipe crossed the sea, and then it crossed it again to come back with the Libyan immigrants. So that's one story that I like. There's actually very many more. So if anyone is actually interested in Libyan cooking, just be in touch with me over email and we can talk more about it. It's a very fascinating exchange of cultures, as it often is between colonial countries and the colonies they occupied.
Thank you. Okay, I have one question left from Joanne Schneeweiss. Wonderful presentation. I was wondering if there are any particular brands of kosher cheeses available in North America that you recommend for Italian cooking.
I don't keep kosher. Like, I mean, I keep kosher as in I don't eat pork and I don't eat shellfish and all of those things, but I don't go shop at kosher specific shops other than for Passover. So I am probably not the best person to answer this question. I can look into it for you and I'd be happy to do that, but top of mind, you catch me unprepared. Now, it depends also what you mean by cheeses, because the really fresh cheeses here you don't really get because there's the whole pasteurization issue. So there's a number of fresh cheeses that we would have in Italy that just don't make it to the US. So we can rule those out. Parmigiano, the Parmesan tends to be always kosher, or at least you can get it certified kosher. And that's usually very nice because it would be like whatever you buy in Italy would be the same as you get here as long as it's Italian and certified kosher, because there's pretty much, I think, just one place that makes it. And then that leaves us with the other cheeses for which I feel I'm not prepared. So I'm gonna bite the bullet on this one. I'll do my research and I'll get back to you. I'll write to Gail with some answers, and I'll expect her to pass them on.
So thank you. I just want to mention one thing because people have been writing to me. Where do you get this book? So
Amazon,
in Canada,
all those places. In Canada, wait, I know this one. You go to Indigo.
Indigo,
I've been there.
yes, or Amazon.
big
We
one in
got it
Toronto.
at Amazon.ca. And
Yeah.
I think we have a link on our website as well. And I highly, highly recommend the book. The photography is fabulous. You go through recipes for each holiday. And there's also some interesting history about towns in Italy, Jewish towns in Italy at the very end. So highly recommend this book for Mother's Day. It's a great gift. It's pretty heavy though.
I did send you the link in the chat for anyone who wants it.
Yes.
But
thank you.
Yes, otherwise, very specific Canadian shop. I've been Indigo. I thought it was really pretty.
Yes. So the next time when you're in Toronto, Benedetta, you have to stop by Beth Tikvah. We have to do a program in person with you.
Indeed.
It was fabulous. We learned a lot. Thank you, Nadia, for moderating the Q&A.
And I owe somebody answers on the cheese. I'll get back to you guys.
I actually have I don't want to prolong it, but I don't have another question, but I wanted to let people know that they have Parmigiano Reggiano that is certified kosher.
It is.
At Italy on Bloor Street in Toronto.
Oh, wait, if you're going to bother to go to Italy, then there is also this other brand that they carry, which has really good cheese, and I believe it's kosher, called Fattorie Fiandino. They have a few of their cheeses, at least in the Italy in LA. I'm not sure about the Italy in Toronto, but that is actually a really nice brand that I believe is kosher. And at least here, Italy carries it. I wrote that in the chat too. So yeah, no, unexpected kosher products are often found in places like Italy.
So thank you. I just want to actually tell everyone I'm plugging our next Zoom event. It's 2 weeks tonight, 8 o'clock. It's Ask the Expert with Dr. Dan Drucker. He is a acclaimed researcher and endocrinologist, and we're going to be talking about diabetes. I know that doesn't go very well with those who are Italian.
Perfect, because after you spend your time with me, then you never know, you might need them.
And we're